The Hartwell estate sat on the edge of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, like a king surveying his kingdom. 12,000 square feet of marble floors, cathedral ceilings, and the particular kind of silence that only serious money can buy. It was the sort of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like grief, wearing an expensive suit. Ethan Cole had purchased this house at 31, 2 years after his technology company, Novatech Solutions, crossed the billion-dollar threshold and landed him on the cover of Forbes magazine with a headline that read, "The boy from nothing who built everything." He had read the headline once, set the magazine face down on his desk, and never looked at it again. The story they told about him was technically accurate. He had grown up poor in South Chicago, had worked 60-hour weeks through college on a scholarship he'd earned by sheer stubbornness, had sacrificed relationships and sleep and anything resembling a normal life to build his empire. But the version they printed left out the parts that kept him awake at 3 in the morning. The way success felt like standing in a room where all the lights were blazing but nobody else was home. He was 33 now, and the house still echoed. His household staff was small by billionaire standards, a groundskeeper who communicated primarily through hand gestures, a personal chef who came Tuesdays and Thursdays, a security team he acknowledged with nods, and a rotating roster of house cleaners managed through a staffing agency in downtown Chicago. Ethan didn't bother learning their names. It wasn't cruelty. It was habit. People came and went in his world with the predictability of seasons, and he had long ago stopped planting things in soil that didn't hold. Sophia Rivera arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October, when the sky over the lake was the color of copper and the air carried the first honest bite of autumn. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield, a dented rear bumper, and a little monster on board, sticker she'd inherited when she bought the car secondhand 18 months ago. She was 28 years old, and she moved through the world with the particular focused efficiency of someone who had never once had the luxury of moving slowly. Every minute mattered. Every minute translated into something specific and real. Groceries, a utility bill, a week of daycare, $1 closer to something she needed so badly it lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. She was assigned the East Wing, the guest rooms, the wood-paneled study, the long hallway of windows overlooking the lake. She brought her own caddy of supplies, tucked her dark curls into a practical bun, and got to work with the kind of quiet focus that other people spend years in therapy trying to achieve. Ethan was in his home office at the opposite end of the house, reviewing a series of acquisition documents that required his full attention and were receiving approximately 60% of it when he heard the sound. Humming. Soft and melodic, drifting under the crack of his office door like water finding its level, something that sounded like a lullaby translated into a cleaning rhythm, completely unself-conscious, the kind of sound a person makes when they think nobody is listening. He looked up, frowned slightly, went back to his documents. 3 minutes later, the second sound reached him. This one he couldn't immediately categorize. It was high and bright and liquid, a burst of pure, uncomplicated toddler laughter that bounced off the marble floors and traveled down the hallway and slipped through his office door like a visitor who hadn't knocked. Ethan pushed back from his desk. He found them in the long hallway overlooking the lake. Sophia was on her knees polishing the baseboard with the focused attention she gave everything, and sitting beside her on a folded blanket, surrounded by a small fortress of board books and stuffed animals, was the smallest person Ethan Cole had ever seen inside this house. She was 3 years old, maybe, with her mother's dark hair and eyes so large and luminous they seemed to take up a disproportionate percentage of her tiny face. She was holding a gray stuffed elephant by the trunk and conducting what appeared to be a formal lecture, delivered to the elephant in a language that was approximately English, but operating under its own grammatical constitution. Sophia scrambled upright the moment she saw him, color rising in her cheeks. "Mr. Cole, I'm so sorry." My babysitter canceled last minute, and the agency coordinator said it might be okay just for today. But if it's a problem, I can. It's fine, Ethan said. The words came out more clipped than he intended, simply because they were true, and he had no warmer template for delivering true things. He looked at the child. The child looked back at him with an expression of complete, fearless, scientific assessment, the way toddlers look at things they're deciding about, with total unself-consciousness. Then she held up her elephant. "This is Gerald," she announced, in the tone of someone making an important introduction. Ethan looked at the elephant. "Hello, Gerald." "He's scared of the big house," the little girl said, with great seriousness.
"Me too."
"A little bit. But Mama says scared is okay." Something shifted in Ethan's chest. It was such a small movement, barely perceptible, like the first millimeter of a door opening that had been sealed for a very long time. "Your mama's right," he said quietly. He returned to his office. He sat down at his desk. He stared at his acquisition documents for a while without reading them. The house, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, did not feel entirely empty. Sophia had not planned for Lily to become a fixture of her Wednesday shifts. But her babysitter's chronic unreliability and the agency's surprisingly relaxed attitude toward the arrangement, combined with Ethan Cole's apparent indifference to the small person occupying his east wing, conspired to make it a pattern over the following 3 weeks. Lily came. She brought Gerald and her board books and her running, unfiltered commentary on every surface and object and phenomenon she encountered. She discovered that running in socks on the marble floors of the East Wing produced a 6-foot slide that she classified, with obvious scientific pride, as the greatest discovery of her lifetime. Ethan's office door, which had always been closed, began to be left slightly ajar. He told himself this was for airflow. He was a man who told himself rational things. He was generally convincing. Then came the afternoon Lily walked into his office without knocking, because she was 3, and knocking was a concept she found theoretically interesting but practically optional, climbed into the leather chair across from his desk with the self-possession of a person who had been invited, and looked at him with those impossible dark eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Working," he said. "On what?" "Numbers." She considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "I know numbers," she said. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. She looked at him with deep satisfaction. "You skip 6, he said. She blinked. "6 is boring." He pressed his lips together very firmly. "Your name is Ethan?" she asked. Sophia had mentioned it once in passing while adjusting the supply caddy in the hallway. "Ethan. Ethan." She filed it away with a small nod. "I'm Lily, like the flower." She pointed to herself with both hands, a gesture of such breezy, absolute self-assurance that Ethan realized he was in the presence of the most genuinely confident individual he had encountered in years, and he spent his professional life surrounded by men who controlled global supply chains. "I know," he said. "Your mom told me." Lily pulled Gerald into her lap and adjusted his trunk into a more dignified position. Then she pressed one small hand flat against her own chest, and her face shifted into something quieter and more serious than anything a 3-year-old's face should have to carry. "My mama works really, really hard," she said. "Because of my heart." Ethan went still. "What about your heart?" "It's broken," she said simply. "The doctors said so. There's a hole." She held up 2 fingers pressed close together. "A little hole, but it's bad. And they say I don't have much time left before I need the big fix." The hallway sounds continued. Somewhere outside, a bird called over the lake. Ethan Cole, who had sat across tables from the most powerful people in the world and never once lost his composure, felt something crack open inside his chest long and old, forgotten seam. "What's the big fix?" he said carefully. "A operation," she said, with the careful pronunciation of a word that had been practiced. "To close the hole. It costs a lot of money." She said this last part with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who has absorbed adult worries through the walls at night. "That's why Mama has 3 jobs." The words lived in Ethan's chest for the rest of that day like a splinter. Small, specific, impossible to ignore. "They say I don't have much time left." After Lily had gone home that evening, tucked against Sophia's side in the parking garage elevator, Ethan sat in his office in the dark. This was unusual for him. He was not a man who sat in the dark. He was a man who answered emails at midnight and read strategic reports at 5 in the morning and kept every light in the house burning, because darkness felt too close to stillness and stillness felt too close to things he preferred not to examine. But tonight he sat still, in the dark, in his 12,000 square foot house that contained exactly one person, and he thought about a 3-year-old girl who carried the word operation in her mouth with the careful weight of a child who doesn't fully understand what it means, but understands that it matters enormously to her mother. He opened his laptop. He searched, "Congenital heart defect surgery costs United States pediatric." The numbers he found didn't surprise him the way they might have surprised someone without his financial literacy. He understood immediately, mathematically, what those numbers would mean to someone working 3 jobs at 28 years old. The word that came to him was unsurvivable. Not the surgery. The debt. For someone in Sophia's position, without intervention, the financial burden of this surgery would be unsurvivable without destroying everything else she had. He pulled up the personnel file the agency had on record. He wasn't supposed to have access to it. It wasn't part of the standard employer arrangement, but he had made a single call to someone who owed him a favor, and the file had appeared in his email within the hour, because that was how his world operated, and he had long since made peace with that. Sophia Maria Rivera, 28 years old, Bachelor of Social Work, University of Illinois, graduated with honors. 6 years of community social services work, specializing in healthcare access and patient advocacy at a nonprofit in the west suburbs. Employment terminated, not by misconduct, he noted, but by organizational funding cuts, 18 months ago. Since then, staffing agency placements, a part-time waitressing position, a weekend shift at a grocery store, and a daughter with a heart condition. He read it twice. He closed the laptop. Then he opened his email and wrote a message to the director of his family foundation with a subject line that read, "That healthcare access liaison position, still open?" The response came back in 12 minutes. "Yes. We've interviewed, but haven't found the right candidate."
Why?
He drafted his reply with care. Then he drafted something else, a folder of documents, a formal job offer on letterhead, a note in his own handwriting at the bottom. He printed it in the morning before Sophia arrived. She found it on the kitchen counter with her name on it. He watched from the doorway of the adjoining room, not because he was spying, but because he was a person who needed to understand outcomes, and he needed to see her face when she read it. He watched her open the folder. He watched her read. He watched her read it again. And then he watched Sophia Rivera, a woman he had known 3 weeks, a woman with a social work degree and 3 jobs and $11,000 in savings and a daughter whose heart had a hole in it, lower herself to the floor of his kitchen and cry without making a single sound, while her 3-year-old pressed a small face against hers and said something too quiet for Ethan to hear. He stepped back. He gave her the dignity of that moment. He went to his office and sat very still, and the thing that had cracked open in his chest the afternoon before cracked open a little wider, and he realized with slow, bewildered clarity that he was going to have to start being honest with himself about what was happening to him inside this house. Sophia didn't say yes that day. She was a woman who had learned that the spaces between what something looked like and what it actually was could be vast and treacherous, and she was going to close that space with due diligence before she stepped into it. She called a paralegal friend. She read every line of the contract. She cross-checked the foundation's legitimacy, its IRS filings, its history of actual employment. It was all exactly what it appeared to be.
Clean. Real.
No strings she could find. She called Ethan on the second evening. He answered on the first ring. "I have questions," she said. "I expected that," he said. "Why me?" Specifically. There had to be other candidates. A pause. She could hear him choosing his words. "Your resume is genuinely the best fit we've had for the position," he said. "That's true, and I can prove it by showing you the other applications. But I also want to be honest with you because I think you deserve that, and I think you can tell when you're not getting it." Another pause. "I heard what Lily told me, and I have the capacity to help. The job is real. The help is real. The two things don't have to be a contradiction." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Outside her apartment window, the October sky had gone deep purple over the rooftops. Lily was asleep in the next room, breathing the soft, even rhythm that Sophia checked on 4 times a night because she was a mother and she was afraid, and love is just fear with better intentions. "Okay," she said. "I have more questions." "Ask them," he said. She asked them. He answered all of them without hesitation or deflection. At the end of the conversation, there was a silence that was different from the cold silences of his empty house. This one had something in it, something warm and cautious and uncertain, like the very first light before a full sunrise. "I'll start Monday," she said. "The insurance activates on day 1 of employment," he said. "I want you to know that." Her throat tightened. "I know," she said. "I read the contract 3 times." She heard something that might have been the shadow of a smile in his voice when he said, "I expected that too." Sophia Rivera had built her walls the same way Ethan Cole had built his company, deliberately from whatever materials were available, using tools she taught herself to use because there had been no one standing by to teach her. They were good walls. They had held her upright through a childhood spent watching her mother sacrifice her health to keep a roof over their heads, through her father's departure when she was 9 years old, through an ex who had been tender and then absent, and then a name on a custody document that said 0, through the funding cut that ended her career, through the diagnosis that had landed on her daughter's medical chart like a sentence. She had survived all of it. She was still here. She had Lily and $11,000 and a cracked windshield and the kind of self-possession that only comes from having nothing handed to you ever and choosing to keep going anyway. She did not need anyone. She reminded herself of this on the Monday morning. She walked into Novatech's foundation offices on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Chicago, wearing the blazer she'd owned since her last nonprofit job and the earrings her mother had left her, carrying Lily's latest crayon drawing in her bag because Lily had insisted she take it for good luck. The drawing appeared to be Gerald the elephant in what might have been an office building, surrounded by what might have been flowers. Or explosions. It was genuinely unclear. The foundation work was real and it was good, and she was good at it in a way that settled something in her, the way coming back to a language you'd been forbidden from speaking settles something. She worked with hospital systems and community organizations and insurance navigators to help families access pediatric health care. She was, in other words, doing for other families exactly what had been done for her, and the recognition of that symmetry kept her company on the train home every evening. She still came to the estate on Wednesdays. The foundation position was 4 days a week. Ethan had apparently not communicated to the staffing agency that the arrangement needed to change, and when Sophia mentioned it, he said, without looking up from his desk, that the East Wing still needed maintenance, and she was still the best person they'd sent. She chose not to examine that statement too carefully. Lily's presence at the estate on Wednesdays had by now evolved from an awkward logistical necessity into something that felt uncomfortably and wonderfully like a ritual. Lily arrived with Gerald and immediately reported to Ethan's office, which had an open-door policy that had not existed 6 weeks ago. She updated him on developments at her daycare. She showed him things she had drawn. She asked him questions that a 3-year-old has every right to ask and that a 33-year-old billionaire is entirely unprepared to answer, like why clouds are soft-looking but wet, and whether fish know they're in water, and why he didn't smile more because his face looked better when he did. "She told you your face looks better when you smile?" Sophia said, covering her mouth in genuine mortification. Later that same afternoon, she said, and I quote, "You should do that more, Ethan. It makes you look like a regular person," Ethan said. Sophia pressed her forehead against the kitchen doorframe and shook with suppressed laughter. Ethan watched her. He watched the way her shoulders shook and the way she had to press her hand over her mouth and the way her eyes, when she finally looked up, were bright with tears of helpless amusement. He noted all of this in the same precise, involuntary way he noted everything important. He was 33 years old, and he was very slowly learning to feel things again in a house that had previously functioned primarily as a monument to what feeling nothing looked like. One evening in late October, Lily fell asleep on the couch in the sunroom while Sophia was finishing up the last of her work. It happened suddenly and completely, the way toddlers go to sleep. One moment fully animated, the next simply gone, curled on her side with Gerald tucked under her chin and her dark hair spread across the cushion. Sophia came in, saw her, and stopped moving. She stood there for a moment, watching her daughter sleep, and the expression on her face was the most private thing Ethan had ever seen on another person's face. It was love distilled to its absolute essential form, terrifying and enormous and completely without defense. He had come in looking for a document he thought he'd left on the side table. He stood in the doorway and watched Sophia watching Lily, and something in his chest did not crack this time. This time it simply opened, quietly, completely, like a window that had been painted shut for years finally giving way to the pressure of a hand. He left the room. He did not retrieve the document. That night, sitting at his desk in the dark, he was doing that more often now, sitting in the dark, and he was starting to understand why. He thought about what he actually wanted his life to look like. He had never asked himself this question before in 33 years. He had always known what he was working toward. But toward is not the same as for. You can build an empire toward a goal and still have no idea what the empire is for, what it holds, what fills it. He looked at the stuffed elephant Gerald, who was sitting on the corner of his desk where Lily had placed him that afternoon, and whom he had not moved. He was starting to understand what his house was for. The surgery was scheduled for the first Tuesday of November at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago at 7:30 in the morning. In the weeks leading up to it, Ethan Cole did things he had not done in years, things with no measurable outcome, no quarterly return, no strategic value whatsoever. He drove Lily and Sophia to preoperative appointments on 3 separate occasions when he learned Sophia's car was in the shop, and sat in waiting rooms surrounded by finger paintings and foam puzzles and children in paper gowns, reading outdated magazines with total concentration to avoid examining why he had rearranged his schedule to be here. He researched the surgical team at Children's Memorial until he knew their professional histories better than they probably did. He called in a favor from a physician friend to get an independent assessment of the operating cardiologist's record. The record was excellent. He made himself stop researching at that point because he recognized the behavior for what it was, anxiety, and he had not felt genuine anxiety about something outside of his own enterprise in so long that the feeling was almost unfamiliar. He was anxious because he cared. The simplicity of this was staggering. He didn't tell Sophia about the research. She would not have liked it. She was a woman of considerable dignity who had drawn careful, principled lines around what she would accept and how. The job, the insurance, she had accepted those because they were legitimate and reciprocal. But she had also, in quiet ways, begun finding means of contributing back, bringing food from a Cuban bakery she loved, fixing things around the estate that were broken with a confidence that surprised him, staying late to help him prepare for a dinner meeting when his regular assistant was sick. She gave as much as she received. It was something she needed to do. He understood this, and he respected it because it was, in a fundamental way, exactly how he had built his entire life. The night before the surgery, Ethan could not sleep. He sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with a glass of water and the particular insomnia of someone whose thoughts will not stay in the orderly lanes he has assigned them. He was thinking about a 3-year-old girl and a hole in her heart and a surgical team he had memorized the credentials of, and a woman asleep right now in her apartment on the west side of the city, probably not sleeping, probably lying awake in exactly the same way. He picked up his phone and typed, "Are you awake?" 3 minutes passed. Then, yes. He typed, "She's going to be fine." A longer pause this time. Then, "You don't know that." "No," he typed back. "But I believe it. And right now believing it is what we can do." The longest pause yet. Then we. He looked at that word on his screen for a long time. "Yes," he typed.
We.
He didn't receive another message that night. But 20 minutes later, his phone lit up with a photo. Lily, asleep, Gerald tucked under her chin, her face as peaceful as still water. No caption, just the image. He set the phone down and looked at it from across the table for a very long time. The next morning, he was at the hospital before they arrived. He was in the lobby in his coat with 2 cups of coffee from the place 2 blocks away that had a line around the corner every morning, which he had waited in like a person, which he had not done in living memory. When Sophia and Lily came through the automatic doors, Lily in her favorite purple jacket, Gerald in her arms, face solemn with the particular gravity of someone who understands something important is happening even if not precisely what, she saw him and stopped. "You didn't have to," she started. "I wanted to," he said. He held out one of the coffees. He looked at Lily. "Good morning, Lily." Lily studied him with those enormous dark eyes. Then she held out Gerald. "He wants to stay with you," she said, "while I'm in there. So you're not scared." Ethan Cole, who had once negotiated a merger in a room of 40 hostile executives without his pulse rising above 60, felt his throat close so completely that for a moment he couldn't form words. He took Gerald. He held him carefully. "Thank you," he managed. "It's okay to be scared," Lily told him earnestly. "Mama says so." Sophia was looking at a spot approximately 6 inches to the left of his face, which was what she did when she was fighting something she didn't want him to see. He handed her the coffee. Their fingers overlapped on the cup for just a moment, just a second, and neither of them moved away. They went in together. The waiting room on the pediatric surgical floor of Children's Memorial Hospital was painted in warm yellows and soft blues, with a mural of animals on one wall that someone had spent a great deal of care on, and chairs that were slightly more comfortable than hospital chairs usually were, and a box of tissues on every table in the acknowledgement that this was a room in which people cried. Ethan and Sophia sat in it for 4 hours and 40 minutes. They did not talk very much at first. There is a particular silence that descends in these rooms, not the cold, empty silence of Ethan's estate, not the careful silence of 2 people who don't know each other well enough yet. This was the silence of 2 people holding the same weight in the same place at the same time, and that shared gravity did something to the space between them that all of their careful, guarded weeks of circling each other had not. Sophia had brought a book. She did not open it past the first page. Ethan had brought his laptop. He opened it twice and closed it twice and left it in his bag. At some point in the second hour, Sophia's hand, resting on the arm of her chair, curled inward, a small, involuntary clench, the physical expression of a fear she was keeping very carefully managed. Ethan saw it. Without overthinking it, without the usual calculation that preceded every personal gesture he made, he reached over and placed his hand over hers. She went very still. He didn't say anything. He didn't explain or justify. His hand was simply there over hers, steady and warm. And after a moment, after a long moment, in which he could feel the war she was having with herself, her fingers uncurled and turned upward and held on. They sat like that for a long time. "She told me you keep Gerald on your desk," Sophia said eventually, quietly, looking straight ahead. She was very proud of that.
"She knows things," he said.
"She's always known things," Sophia said. "Since she was born. She looks at people and she just knows. My mother said, she has an old soul." A pause. "My mother would have been completely enchanted by you, by the way. She loved people who were a project." "Is that what I am?" There was a gentleness in his voice that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. Sophia glanced at him sideways. "You were," she said carefully. "I think now you might be something else."
"What?"
She looked away again. The yellow walls of the waiting room held the morning light in a way that was almost kind. "I'm still figuring out the word," she said. He nodded. He didn't press. He was learning her the way you learn a language that is worth learning, slowly, respectfully, without forcing conjugations. "My father left when I was 9, he said after a while. He said it simply, without preamble, because the waiting room was a place outside of regular time and regular defenses, and something about Sophia's hand in his made honesty feel less like exposure and more like relief. My mother had a breakdown when I was 12. I basically raised myself and my younger sister from 13 on. I worked from 14. I promised myself I was going to build something no one could take from me." He paused. "I did that. And then I was standing in the middle of everything I'd built, and I realized I didn't know what it was for." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Until recently?" she asked. "Until recently," he confirmed. She looked at him then, fully, directly, the way she rarely did, with all of her carefully constructed composure exactly where it was, and also somehow entirely beside the point.
"Ethan," she said.
"Whatever this is between us, whatever it's becoming, I need you to know that it isn't about what you've done for us.
"The job."
The insurance. I need you to know that I would be sitting here either way. She stopped. Swallowed. Started again. That you are not a transaction to me." The words landed in his chest like light into a room that had forgotten what light felt like. "I know," he said quietly. "You're the least transactional person I have ever met." Her laugh was small and involuntary and broke something loose in both of them. "Dr. Kessler for a Vera family?" They both stood. The surgeon came toward them with the steady, unhurried walk of someone who carries life and death news often enough to have learned how to carry it. Sophia's hand gripped Ethan's. He gripped back. "The procedure went beautifully," the surgeon said. "She is in recovery and doing extremely well. The defect is fully repaired. There is every reason to expect a complete, normal recovery and an entirely normal, full life ahead of her." Sophia's knees went. Ethan caught her, simply and completely, one arm around her shoulders, holding her up in the waiting room with its yellow walls and its box of tissues. She pressed her face against his chest and cried with the full, released, unguarded grief and relief of someone who has been holding a weight for so long that putting it down feels, for a moment, almost like falling. He held her. He held her and said nothing because there were no words for this. And he had learned in this room today that sometimes the right thing is simply to be the thing that holds. Lily came home from the hospital on a Thursday. She was smaller seeming in the following days, tender in the way of someone whose body has been through something significant and is taking the time it needs. She slept more. She was quieter. But her eyes were just as large and bright as they had ever been, and by the end of the first week, she had resumed her narration of Gerald's emotional states and her opinions on the relative excitement levels of various numbers, and Sophia, watching her from across the room, felt the particular, profound gratitude of a parent whose child has been given back to her. December arrived. The lake outside the Hartwell estate went gray and silver under winter skies, and the trees along its edge stood bare and beautiful the way things can be beautiful when they've given everything away. Lily's recovery checkup was excellent. Her cardiologist used the phrase textbook repair. He said the word healed in a sentence that Sophia listened to 3 times in her memory that evening, turning it over like something precious. Healed. Things changed between Ethan and Sophia the way seasons change. Not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small shifts, small openings, small permissions. He started cooking dinner on the evenings she was at the estate because it turned out he could cook. Actually cook, not in the performative way of someone doing it for effect, but in the genuine, skilled way of a man who had learned out of necessity and found, somewhere along the way, that it gave him satisfaction. She stayed for dinner more often than she didn't. Lily ate with them at the kitchen table, conducted spirited debates about which foods were acceptable, conclusions, most pasta yes, all mushrooms no. Gerald's opinions on the matter varied by day, and fell asleep in Ethan's armchair on 2 separate occasions, which he discovered both times and both times sat down on the floor nearby rather than wake her, reading on his phone in the lamplight like a person who had nowhere better to be. He had nowhere better to be. That was the truth of it. He had built 12,000 square feet of marble and glass on the edge of a lake as a monument to what he had achieved, and he had walked through it alone for 2 years hearing it echo, and now there were sock slides on the east wing floors and crayon drawings on his desk and Gerald in the corner of his office, and a woman's laughter drifting up from the kitchen. And the house was so full of sound that sometimes he stood in the doorway of a room just to listen. One evening in mid-December, Lily was sitting on the kitchen counter while Sophia made hot chocolate, a ritual they had developed, the 3 of them, on cold evenings, and Lily looked at Ethan with that ancient assessment of the universe expression she had been applying to him since October.
"Ethan," she said.
"Yeah? Are you going to be our family?" The kitchen went very quiet. Sophia's spoon stopped moving in the saucepan. Ethan looked at this 3-year-old girl, this person who had walked into his house and walked into his chest and rearranged everything she found there without asking permission, and felt something so large and clear and true move through him that he almost laughed with the simple weight of it. He looked at Sophia. She was looking at the pot and the back of her neck was flushed, and she was very deliberately not turning around. "I'm working on it," he said. Lily nodded, satisfied.
"Good," she said.
"Gerald thinks so, too." Sophia turned around then. Her eyes were bright, and she was trying very hard to be composed and failing in the most beautiful way he had ever seen a person fail at anything. She pointed the spoon at him. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he said. "Sophia." "Ethan." "I bought this house because I thought I knew what I was building," he said. He didn't move from where he was standing, by the kitchen doorway, because he had learned with her that patience was not weakness. It was respect, offered in the form of space. "I didn't know what I was building it for until about 8 weeks ago when a 3-year-old walked into my office and told me that scared was okay and then asked if I had crackers." His voice was steady and quiet and entirely honest. "I'm not going to rush you. I'm not going to presume. But I need you to know that I wake up every morning, and the first thing I think about is the 2 of you. And I want, if you'll let me, to be someone you can count on. Not as a transaction. Not as charity. As someone who wants to be here.
He paused.
As someone who's already here, if I'm being accurate about it. Sophia set down the spoon. She crossed the kitchen. She stood in front of him and looked up at him with those dark, careful, exhausted, beautiful eyes. Eyes that had seen hard things and kept going. Eyes that had cried on his kitchen floor and held him in a hospital waiting room and watched her daughter sleep with a love too enormous for the body that held it. And she reached up and put her hand against his face with the particular gentleness of someone who has decided, after a very long time, that this is where they want to put their hands. "Don't make me cry in front of the hot chocolate," she said. He covered her hand with his. "I make no promises," he said. She laughed. He smiled, actually smiled, the way Lily had told him he should do more, the way that made him look like a regular person. And the kitchen was warm and smelled like chocolate and December, and on the counter Lily had picked up Gerald and was narrating something to him in a tone of great celebration, and outside the windows the lake was cold and silver, and the world was doing exactly what it always does, holding, and occasionally, when something aligns just right, releasing. 6 months later, Lily's cardiologist declared her fully healed. Not managing. Not monitoring. Healed. He said she could run, jump, swim, climb, everything. He said her heart was whole. She took the news by immediately running in her socks down the hallway of the doctor's office to demonstrate, which required Sophia to apologize to 2 nurses and a man with a clipboard, and which made Ethan Cole stand in a medical corridor laughing with his whole chest in a way he genuinely could not remember doing since he was young enough not to know what it cost. That evening, in the house on Lake Geneva, with Lily asleep in what had quietly become her room over the preceding months, full of books and a sun-shaped nightlight and approximately 47 stuffed animals of which Gerald remained the undisputed patriarch, Ethan and Sophia sat on the dock in winter coats, watching the lake go dark under a sky full of the particular bright, unsparing stars that appear over Wisconsin when the air is cold enough to be honest. "She's healed," Sophia said. She said it like she was still learning how to hold the words. "She's healed," he confirmed. A long, warm silence. "I'm not scared anymore," Sophia said softly. "I've been scared for so long I forgot what it felt like not to be. And I woke up this morning, and it was just..." She paused. "Gone." He looked at her profile against the dark water. "What does it feel like? Not being scared?" She thought about it for a genuine moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, and her breath came out slow and long in the cold air, and she said something that was true, and also everything. "Like this," she said. The lake was still. The stars were out. Inside the house behind them, in a room full of books and one very distinguished stuffed elephant, a little girl with a whole and healed heart was breathing the deep, even rhythm of someone who has all the time in the world. "Scared is okay, Mama says so. And sometimes, when you stop running from the emptiness and let something in, it stops being empty at all." The end.